Hey everybody, congratulations on finishing your first test in remote learning and learning about Abraham Lincoln, entering politics in his law career. We are now moving on to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So we're going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln competing against his rival Stephen Douglas. As you remember, he met Stephen Douglas when he lived above Joshua Speed's General Store, and they used to have get-togethers in the evening, and Lincoln and Douglas were kind of opposites. They became rivals, and now they are running against each other for Illinois State Senator. You can see my buddy Rocco's back there. That's my dog. He's going to be hanging out with us today as we begin reading about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Again, all the videos, songs, images, text, and graphics used in the video belong to their respective owners, and I or this channel does not claim any right over them. So I hope you found that the first test was not too bad. All the questions came directly from the notes and came directly from the study guide. It's important you watch the videos every day and that you get copies of the notes that I attach to the assignments. All of the answers for your study guide, all of the answers for your test can be found in the videos or in the notes. Please do not Google search them. You will probably come up with the wrong answer because depending on the website, it's probably not talking about the same period of time that we are in Lincoln's life. So that's why you had a lot of incorrect answers. I caught on to that. So make sure you're watching. This book, it's called The Lincoln-Douglas Debates. This is what you would have been reading if we were together in class by Michael Bergen. So I'm going to start with the first chapter, Debating Slavery, because slavery was the number one big issue during this campaign for Illinois State Senator. On a hot August day in 1858, thousands of people poured into the Illinois town of Ottawa. They braved the heat to hear a debate between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. They held a series of debates. There were 7 debates that they held total. The 2 men were candidates for the U.S. Senate for Illinois. The Senate, along with the U.S. House of Representatives, is who makes laws for our country. Douglas belonged to the Democratic Party, one of the 2 major political groups in the nation. He had served as one of Illinois' 2 U.S. senators since 1847. So Douglas had already been a senator and he was running for his position that he currently held. Lincoln, who was a member of the Republican Party, had once served in the House of Representatives. Now he wanted to take Douglas's spot in the Senate. Now, if you remember correctly, Lincoln, when he went out to Washington, D.C., and he served in the House of Representatives there, he served a 2-year term that was very unsuccessful. It didn't do much for him, and he wasn't interested in being in politics anymore. But remember, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was proposed by Senator Stephen Douglas, is what drew Lincoln back into politics. Now he wants to beat him and take his spot. Douglas was known as the Little Giant, just 5 feet 4 inches tall. That's an inch taller than me. He was one of the most important members of the Democratic Party. Lincoln, who was a foot taller at 6 feet 4 inches, challenged Douglas to a series of debates before the November election. Douglas agreed to meet Lincoln 7 times. Each man hoped to convince the voters that he was the best person to represent Illinois in the Senate. So they're speaking against each other. A debate is when 2 people usually have opposing views that are opposite of each other, and they're trying to convince each other and the audience why their view is the one that's correct. In the debates, Lincoln and Douglas offered their opinions and questioned each other on various issues. The most important issue of the day was slavery. During the 1850s, many Americans held opposing views on slavery. Northern states had either already outlawed slavery or never allowed it at all. Many people in the North did not want slavery to spread to new U.S. territories or states. A smaller number of Northerners, called abolitionists, wanted slavery to end everywhere in the country as soon as possible. So people of the North either were non-slave states and did not allow slavery, or some Northerners didn't want it anywhere at all in any state. Southerners, for the most part, accepted slavery. Southern states relied on slaves to care for the crops that were grown there and sold around the world. Some slaves also had trained skills such as carpentry or shipbuilding. Many Southerners feared their economy would collapse if slavery ended. They thought the government should protect slavery and allow it to expand into new territories. So you can kind of see opposite views. The southern states wanted to keep slavery because they used slaves on their plantations to help harvest crops, among other things, which the South is known for growing crops. The northern states did not need that kind of labor because they were more industrial, like factories and transportation, not known for growing crops. Douglas and his supporters in Illinois thought the citizens of each new state or territory had the right to decide if they wanted slavery. This idea was called popular sovereignty. Make sure you know that term, popular sovereignty. Now I'm going to explain what that is. Lincoln and the Republicans rejected popular sovereignty. They did not want slavery to expand into other parts of the country. Lincoln believed that slavery in general was wrong, but he was not an abolitionist. He hoped slavery would slowly end where it already existed. The two men's difference in views was at the center of the debates. So popular sovereignty is the belief that the new states being admitted to the United States should have the right to vote whether they wanted to be free or slave. Douglas proposed that. That was part of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He believed they should have the opportunity to decide that by vote for themselves. Lincoln did not like the idea of slavery. He didn't want any more than there already was. He was hoping that what they had at the time would be all they had, and eventually it would phase out and die out on its own. Even though it was a state campaign, so only the state of Illinois, okay, it's a state government job that reports to Springfield, Illinois, not Washington, D.C. The whole country, though, followed those debates. Lincoln became popular with Republicans all over the United States. Thanks in part to the fame Lincoln won from the debates, he was chosen as the Republican candidate for president in 1860. So these debates are what boosted Lincoln's popularity across the entire nation, which resulted in him being chosen as the candidate in the election of 1860 and ultimately becoming president in 1860. In that election, he defeated Douglas. Okay, so we're talking about the presidential election right now. He did defeat Douglas and two other candidates. In 1860, slavery was still the main issue dividing the nation, and slavery would soon lead to the Civil War. After the election, some southern slave states seceded to make sure they could keep slavery. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the presidential election, but to secede means to withdraw. So some of the southern states withdrew and said, we're not part of the United States anymore. You won't let us keep slavery, so we're not going to be a part of the country anymore. And that's the North versus South, Civil War, and we'll get into all that. Lincoln led the North as it fought to keep the country united and eventually end slavery. Okay, this next chapter is called Newcomers to Illinois. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas had several things in common. Although both men made their political careers in Illinois, neither was born in this state. Lincoln was born in Kentucky in 1809, which I hope you remember. His family farmed there before moving to Indiana. As a boy, Lincoln did not regularly attend school, but he learned to read and deeply loved books. In 1830, his family settled in Illinois. All things that we've learned. Lincoln left his family's farm at the age of 21. The following year, he moved to New Salem, Illinois. He served in the local militia during the Black Hawk War, a war between American settlers and Indians. After the war, he returned to New Salem to live and work. He won his first political campaign in 1834 when he was elected to the state legislature called the Illinois General Assembly. At that time, Lincoln belonged to the Whig Party. Remember, the Whig Party eventually dies out and sort of gives birth to the Republican Party by the term Republican that we know today. This party promoted industry and banking in the United States. While in the legislature, Lincoln studied to become a lawyer. Now, we all knew all of that. That was review, but let's talk about Douglas. He was born in 1813 in Vermont. Like Lincoln, he grew up on a farm. But unlike his opponent, Douglas spent 3 months every year at a local school, so he was educated in a formal school setting. Later, he attended an academy in New York. The school was similar to a college. Douglas moved to Illinois in 1833 and studied law. Like Lincoln, he became a lawyer and entered politics. So we're kind of seeing similarities and differences. Important to pick up on those because we're going to have an assignment with that where we're comparing and contrasting Lincoln and Douglas. In 1835, Illinois lawmakers elected Douglas an attorney for the state. The next year, he was elected to the state legislature. As a Democrat, Douglas backed his party's efforts to help farmers and workers move and settle in western parts of the United States. Douglas also supported building new railroads and canals to move people and goods. Douglas and Lincoln met each other for the first time as members of the legislature. Now, that's where history is a little different when you're looking at different sources. This one says they met in the legislature, but we know they met informally at Joshua Speed's store, general store. At times, they shared the same views, even though they belonged to opposing parties. But already they had different views on slavery. In 1837, Douglas voted for an anti-abolition resolution. That's a statement that expresses an opinion on a political issue. The resolution criticized the goals of U.S. abolitionists and stated that slavery was legal under the U.S. Constitution. So we'll pause for a second. Abolitionists firmly believe zero slavery, not allowed at all. Now, Douglas believed that slavery was legal under the U.S. Constitution. Lincoln, though, was only one of only 6 Illinois lawmakers who voted against the resolution. So there's an opposite right there. But he supported another resolution that said the U.S. government has no power under the Constitution to interfere with slavery in the different states. So Lincoln doesn't want to interfere. He doesn't propose the idea that he goes into states and makes slavery illegal. That was not what he wanted to do. He just didn't want any more of it. Lincoln served in the Illinois legislature for 8 years. During that time, Douglas left the state legislature and held several jobs related to government and politics. For a time, he served on Illinois' most important court, the state Supreme Court. In 1842, Douglas was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He was still in the House in 1847 when Lincoln was elected a representative. The two men, however, did not serve in the House at the same time, so their paths did not cross at that time. By the time Lincoln began his term, Douglas was serving as a U.S. Senator. When Lincoln's 2-year term ended, he did not run for the House again. That was a question on your test. He had told voters that he only intended to serve for one term during his 1847 campaign. So, let's see here. I'll go one more chapter. We may go a little over 15 minutes. Hang in there. This is interesting stuff. Slavery in the West is the 3rd chapter. You can see Rocco thinks it's real exciting back there. He's taking a snoozer. Lincoln returned to Illinois to practice law. Meanwhile, Douglas became known across the nation for his work in the Senate. So during this time, Lincoln served as a representative in Washington, D.C., came home, kind of fell under the radar. Okay, so at this time, before he runs for Senate, he's kind of back at doing his law thing, while Douglas is making a name known for himself in politics because he was a senator. One of Douglas's goals was for the United States to acquire new lands in the West. So remember, our country is expanding at this time. It's not 50 states yet. Some Whigs opposed adding new territory because slave owners wanted to bring their slaves to these lands. Northern Whigs did not want slavery to spread beyond the South. While some Whigs simply thought slavery was wrong, others wanted to limit its growth for political reasons. As the United States expanded and became larger, northern states lost some of their influence to the southern and western states. If slavery were allowed to spread, the South and West would have more representatives in Congress than the North. So, if new slave states are added to the country, it's going to throw off the balance of how many government officials are out in Washington, D.C. So you can imagine if there's more people from the South and more representatives from the South or slave states, then there are going to be more people who vote in favor of slavery. So you've got people who are abolitionists and don't want to see slavery expand, and they don't want slave states to have more votes than they do in the government. I'm not sure if I read the sentence. I'm going to read it again. If I did, sorry. If slavery were allowed to spread, the South and West would have more representatives in Congress than the North. I think I read that. The slave states could then control Congress, and the North might not ever have a chance to limit or end slavery. Slave states could also establish government policies that favored farming, their main source of income. So remember, we have farming in the South, and then we have industry in the North. So if there are more slave states, there are going to be more votes for farming measures than there will be for northern industrial measures. These policies might hurt the interests of free states that relied more on trade and manufacturing, which happens in the North. Douglas and other Northern Democrats in Congress wanted the support of slave Southern slave owners. One way to win that support was by allowing slavery to spread. In 1848, Douglass began to speak in support of popular sovereignty. That gives the right to determine whether a new state is slave or a slave state or not, based on allowing those people to vote. At the time, Congress was debating whether to allow California to become a state. Lawmakers were also considering whether New Mexico and other western lands should become U.S. territories. Lawmakers disagreed on whether slavery should be allowed in these areas. Douglass believed that the control of slavery belongs entirely with the state or territory. The U.S. government cannot touch the subject. Douglass wants the states to decide for themselves. Lincoln does not feel that way. The spread of slavery was threatening to divide the nation. In both the North and South, people spoke about disunion, splitting the United States into two countries. One would allow slavery and the other would not. Douglass opposed disunion. He had hoped to keep the country whole while preserving slavery. One way to do this was to compromise on certain issues. So, the southern states feel so strongly about this. They're saying, hey, if you are going to get rid of it, we're leaving. We'll make two countries. And the North is kind of saying the same thing in a way. Like, if you keep allowing it, this is a problem. So compromise, that's coming to sort of a mutual agreement. Every side kind of gives a little on both sides. In the Compromise of 1850, Congress decided to let California enter the Union as a free state. Utah and New Mexico would become U.S. territories, and their residents would decide whether they wanted slavery. Since neither territory had slavery at that time, most people assumed they would remain free, which satisfied Northerners. Southerners, meanwhile, were glad Congress was supporting popular sovereignty. Sorry, my legs are falling asleep. So we've got a couple new territories being admitted to the United States at that time. The people who are sort of anti-slavery feel that it's going to be okay to let them vote because they don't have slavery already. They don't think they're going to vote for it anyway. So they're kind of compromising. And then the Southerners are like, well, you know, you're giving them the right to vote, so that's okay because that's popular sovereignty and we're good with that. So that's going to be it for today, but I want to go over what your notes say. Check out the notes. They're attached to the assignment. Make sure you screenshot, take a picture, print them out. They're going to be on your, used for your study guide and your test. And I think by now you know that since you took your test. So we have Lincoln and Douglass running for Illinois State Senate. Stephen Douglas is the Democratic candidate. Abraham Lincoln is the Republican. 7 debates in total. Slavery is the main issue. The North sort of was split on their feelings about slavery. Some of them were anti-slavery completely. They're called abolitionists. And others just did not want it to spread. Douglass, however, believed in popular sovereignty. Again, that term is on your test. That gives the right to determine whether to be a free or slave state. That gives that right to the people of that territory or state and allows them the right to vote. Lincoln did not want slavery to spread, but he was not an abolitionist. He was going to leave it where it was and not touch it. Douglass was formally educated. We know Lincoln was self-educated, and that was a term we talked about before. They were both lawyers and wanted to keep the country whole. That's a similarity. We talked about limiting slavery for political reasons. The North was afraid if new states were allowed to become slave states, they would be outvoted on government policies and issues, and that the South would be favored. So they were really concerned with that. I really miss you guys, as I've said before. Some of you are doing an exceptionally wonderful job with your work. So kudos to you. You've done a great job so far. Some of you are not watching the videos. I know they're not that exciting, but make sure you do that so that you are successful in this class and you learn the information. Hey, Rocco, you want to come say hi? Rocco, come here. Rocco, come here. Come here. Here, look at the camera. Can you look at the camera? Say hi, guys. Well, Rocco and I, we want to say we hope you have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you soon. I'll be back with another video tomorrow. Please answer the question for today. Not every video will be 20 minutes long, but it is today. Bye, guys.